Welcome, esteemed scholars, students, and viewers. The purpose of this educational presentation is strictly academic, designed as a model lecture for a political science essay. This analysis explores international political psychology, macroeconomics, and popular economic psychology within alliance relations. It examines how systemic policy shifts, regulatory friction, and executive overreach impact national economies through a hypothetical scenario involving trade sanctions under Section 301 of the U.S. Trade Act. This analysis does not target or defame any individual or entity, serving purely as a theoretical exercise in foreign policy, executive psychology, and financial market dynamics, systemic intervention, executive psychology, and sanctions risks under U.S. Super 301. When a left-wing administration engages in comprehensive market intervention from micro price controls to forced corporate relocation and pushes regulations that clash with global standards such as network law amendments and targeted tech platform sanctions, diplomatic and economic friction with its primary ally, the United States, escalates dramatically. This study examines this dynamic through international political psychology, hubris syndrome, groupthink, macroeconomics, and economic psychology, analyzing the cascading fallout should the U.S. invoke Super 301 trade sanctions. Predicting the Super 301 invocation timeline. Economic sanctions under Section 301 are projected to take effect at the end of Q3 2026, August, September. First basis executive threshold. In early July 2026, the White House issued a final statement warning of retaliatory measures against unfair trade practices. In diplomatic protocol, a direct White House statement signals that lower-level negotiations are exhausted. Second basis ambassador recall. On July 15, 2026, the ambassador to the U.S. urgently returned home for consecutive meetings with foreign affairs, NSC, and economic officials, indicating the grace period has ended. With USTR conducting its fastest investigation on record, sanctions are over 95%, likely to take effect in August, September, unless radical concessions are made immediately. 2. Analytical framework, international political psychology. 3 psychological constructs illuminate executive decision-making during alliance friction. 1. Hubris syndrome. David Owen's concept describes power holders who lose touch with reality, equate personal judgment with national interest, and ignore international norms, disregarding diplomatic protocols or coercing top semiconductor firms. Samsung SK to invest 800 trillion KRW in infrastructure-deficient regions exemplifies this syndrome, placing political will above market logic and board duties. 2. Laws of power and microcontrol. Expanding power tends to narrow its focus to micromanagement, mandating uniform delivery app prices, half-portion chicken sales, pet food label, ordering or morning calisthenics, represents state overreach into citizen lifestyles and corporate management, creating economic deadweight loss. 3. Groupthink. Irving Janis showed that cohesive, decision-making groups ignore external warnings due to ideological rigidity. Despite multiple U.S. warnings regarding speech restrictions and platform regulations, internal failure to correct course reveals an executive security apparatus trapped in confirmation, bias, and groupthink. The third, financial market dynamics and economic fallout. Section 301 allows the U.S. to unilaterally impose punitive tariffs on unfair trade partners. Its fallout spans foreign exchange, capital flows, and behavioral responses. 1. Foreign exchange and capital flight analysis. As of July 21, 2026, the U.S. DKRW rate retraced from 1,550 to 1,474. Rather than a recovery of fundamentals, 1,474 represents a dead cat bounce, induced by state intervention, and a transition from short-term speculative capital flight to long-term structural exodus. The key driver is a surge in sovereign risk premiums caused by non-market regulations and impending sanctions. 2. Phase 1 capital flight, the 1,550 overshooting model. The initial breach of 1,550 aligns with Rudiger. Dornbusch's exchange rate overshooting model. Asset markets reacted instantly to systemic policy risks. Panic selling and herd behavior, global funds treated policy. Unpredictability as a systematic risk and withdrew capital, causing herd behavior that pushed the rate past fundamental levels to 1,550. Micro-dollarization. Wealthy individuals and corporate leaders liquidated local assets for USD deposits and US equities, accelerating capital flight from within. 3. Phase 2 capital flight, the 1,474 plateau. The drop to 1,474 reflects reserve depletion rather than structural stability. Artificial rate defense authorities sold massive foreign reserves to defend credit ratings at the 1,550 line. Depleting these reserves leaves the economy vulnerable to secondary short selling once intervention capacity peaks. FPI to FDI transition. Capital flight has evolved from short-term portfolio investments, FPI, to real sector flight. Multinationals are liquidating domestic assets to avoid tariffs and local regulations, while domestic conglomerates undergo insider capital flight, transferring production overseas to survive. 4. Psychological traps and catastrophic scenario. Boiling frog and anchoring effect. The pullback to 1474 creates an illusory sense of stability, though it remains an extraordinarily high rate that slowly erodes the real economy through elevated import costs. Information asymmetry. Informed investors use the temporary 1,474 window to convert, remaining KRW to USD, while the general public relies on government reassurance and remains trapped in domestic assets. 3-stage crisis scenario. As Super 301 enforcement hits in late Q3, Q4 2026, reserve depletion will push the exchange rate past 1,550 stage 1, leading to hyperstagflation, forced rate hikes, household debt defaults, and market collapse stage 2. Physical capital controls may be considered, branding the nation as uninvestable, and triggering sovereign default risks stage 3. Ongoing capital flight is not a mere statistical fluctuation, but a fatal economic disease, born of diplomatic hubris and departure from global standards. Concluding remarks, an Eastern classical critique. In reflecting upon statecraft, executive hubris, and economic governance, ancient Eastern wisdom provides a clear critique. The Tao Te Ching states, "He who is puffed up with pride and loses measure brings about his own ruin. He who relies solely on rigid force will ultimately break." Similarly, the Book of Documents Shangshu teaches, contempt and arrogance are the very well springs of calamity. Governance that opposes the natural flow of the market and the will of the people sets a trap for itself. When governance chooses ideological insularity over global realities and attempts to command complex market mechanisms through decrees, it invites destruction. True wisdom lies in humility, adherence to international norms, and respect for economic reality. Closing and engagement request. Thank you for viewing this academic lecture. If you found this analysis insightful, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and sharing it with fellow scholars and students of political science and international relations. Your support helps us continue delivering high-quality academic content.